The largest housing bill in decades has just become law after weeks of tense political standoff between President Trump and Congress. Now comes the real test. Can this ambitious legislation actually make housing affordable again? At its core, the 21st Century Road to Housing Act focuses on three major reforms. First, the law aims to increase the supply of housing by making it easier to build more homes. Researchers have long argued that America's affordability crisis is fundamentally a supply problem. Studies have shown a strong link between the number of homes available and how much people pay to buy or rent them. The median price of an existing home in the U.S. reached $429,300 in May. That's up 50.8% from May 2020. And 30-year fixed mortgage rates continue to hover around 6.5%. By 2025, the U.S. housing shortage had grown to more than 4 million homes.
We underbuilt housing following the Great Recession, and we've really never fully caught up. At the same time, population grew. We had a pandemic-driven surge in demand. We had a demographic demand coming from millennials. The result is that more buyers are competing for fewer homes, which has pushed home prices and rents higher.
The new law attempts to close that gap by combining federal incentives for new construction with reforms designed to speed up home construction. It supports faster permitting and encourages local governments to allow more housing through zoning reforms. It also reduces regulatory barriers that builders argue slow projects and increase construction costs. According to a study by the National Association of Home Builders, federal, state, and local regulations add more than $131,000 to the cost of building a typical new single-family home. The law also expands support for manufactured housing, which is often among the least expensive paths to home ownership. The second reform aims to make housing finance easier to access. For example, the law expands access to mortgage financing for lower-cost homes that have been traditionally difficult to finance. It also updates federal financing programs that support investment and construction of multifamily housing.
The reason is that multifamily housing is one of the fastest and most scalable ways to add meaningful housing supply. It's where you can create hundreds of housing units within a single project. And that's important, especially in markets where affordability pressures are most acute.
By lowering financing barriers for home buyers and housing developers, lawmakers hope to encourage more housing construction while making home ownership more accessible. The final reform aims to limit large institutional investors from buying single-family homes. Under the new law, companies that own at least 350 single-family homes would generally be prohibited from purchasing additional single-family homes. Certain companies with specific requirements, such as building homes specifically for the build-to-rent market, would be exempt. Supporters argue the measure will give individual buyers a better chance to compete for homes.
Investor activity can absolutely influence certain neighborhoods and markets, especially when inventory is limited. And I think that's why policymakers remain focused on that. They want a competitive environment for traditional buyers, and they want some transparency.
However, the extent to which large institutional investors have contributed to rising home prices remains up for debate. One study estimated that institutional investors own about 0.5% of all single-family homes in the United States. Another analysis of 19 major metropolitan areas found little to no relationship between institutional investor ownership and home price appreciation between 2019 and 2024.
They're not necessarily the main culprit in this story. It's really small and medium-sized investors that comprise a much larger share of home buyers, and they're not even mentioned in this bill.
But even if the law proves effective, experts say it could take years before Americans see a meaningful impact on housing costs.
The short-term impact of the housing bill will likely be very modest because most of this bill's tools are supply-side measures. And you can't pass a legislation today and then have thousands of new homes available next month, unfortunately.
Implementation could also prove challenging. According to the Urban Institute, the law tasks the Department of Housing and Urban Development with implementing at least 35 new programs, regulations, studies, and congressional responses. But after significant staffing cuts in 2025, some researchers question whether the agency has enough capacity to carry out these responsibilities. While several clauses in the new law require no funding, implementing them will still take time and resources. In other words, passing the bill is only the first step. Whether Americans actually see lower housing costs now depends on how quickly these reforms translate into more homes on the market.